Okay, well, good evening, everyone, and thank you for giving me a little bit of your time today. Uh, I've been working on a pre-university philosophy course for around 10 years, and the course I've created, I think, becomes more developed every year. And so, what I'd like to do in this little bit of time we have is to explain the course to you and give you a little bit of a sense of why I think philosophy is really valuable in education and how it might fit in to the Glick International Online School program. Before I do that, let me say just a little bit about myself. This is me. I'm Alexander Dutson. I was born in the north of England, in a place very much like this. You can see the rolling hills and the countryside. That's the kind of place that I was born. And this is a Yorkshire traffic jam, for those of you that are interested, because there are more sheep than people in the north of England. Anyway, I'm currently the course coordinator for the philosophy program at a school in Tokyo, and I studied philosophy twice at university at undergraduate level, and then I got my master's in philosophy from Cambridge University. Since then, I've also taken facilitation training with the Philosophy Foundation in London, and the Philosophy Foundation are an accredited charity that train teachers to do philosophy with young people, which is a little bit different from doing it at the university level. I suppose a good question to start off with at the beginning of this presentation is why would anyone want to create a philosophy program like this? Most schools don't teach philosophy, don't have philosophy. And I think here my motives are a little bit selfish. I wanted to create the kind of program that I would have liked to have taken at high school, because when I was in school, I was very much interested in literature, in novels, in history, and in all the questions that spill out of reading novels and thinking about history and religion. Can beings live beyond the grave? Is there an afterlife? Do people truly love each other in a deep way, or is it just sort of trying to survive evolution, if you like? Is time relative or constant? These were the kinds of thoughts that I had as a student, and there really was no place within the British school system at that time for these conversations to happen. It was mainly just inside of a religious studies course. Um, and so when I had the opportunity to create a philosophy program, I thought, look, I'd like to create a space where teenage students have an opportunity to think deeply together about all of the questions that matter to teenagers. And it just so happens that doing this has lots and lots of academic benefits as well as being really enjoyable. And so, yeah, I want to tell you a little bit about this curriculum that I've made. So first off, what kind of materials do we use in the course? Well, this course is not part of the International Baccalaureate. It's not an A-level course. It's something completely bespoke and customized. I've made it myself with one of my co-workers, and we draw on material from a wide range of sources, one of which is, of course, the International Baccalaureate, the Theory of Knowledge course, but also popular works of philosophy, such as the cartoon Introduction to Philosophy, as well as books written by other philosophers with young people that I happen to know and have worked with, such as Peter Worley here. He's a very well-known British philosopher. And this book here, of course, is my own book. And this has a lot of lesson plans that I use as well. Of course, I have a detailed syllabus. This course runs from junior high school first grade to senior high school third grade. It's a 6-year program, and there's a week-by-week plan for content, as well as assessments and assignments for students to complete along the way. Those details are given to students once they enter the course. So maybe I can start by saying a little bit about what makes philosophy different from other subjects we learn at school. I think if I ask you to imagine an average high school class, you'll think of something such as this. A teacher stood at the front in front of a blackboard or a whiteboard or a projector, explaining a concept or an equation or some kind of content for social studies or history, perhaps. And the students are sat in rows or individually. They're looking forward, facing the teacher. They have paper and pen or a computer. And basically what their job is to listen to the teacher, to take notes, to remember the content, and then to reproduce that content in an exam or an essay. In other words, a traditional classroom starts with a knowledgeable teacher and students who don't know what the teacher knows. And the goal of the class is to move that knowledge from the teacher to the students. Philosophy, of course, is not like this at all. It works in the opposite direction. In philosophy, we start with confusion. We start with puzzlement or uncertainty or a problem. And I think the reason for that is that problems are motivating. When we don't know something, there's a desire to find it out. And so, as long as we trust in the process of thinking together, we have a really powerful motivation in confusion for learning. And so, philosophy tries to harness that, it tries to build on that. Plato, the ancient Greek philosopher, famously said that philosophy begins in wonder. And I think that's a kind of wonder that comes from being completely confused. Okay, so as a sort of first distinction, we might contrast traditional education, which is answer-based and teacher-focused, with philosophy, which is question-based and student-focused. And because it's student-focused, when I do a philosophy class, I will always refrain from answering questions the students have. I'll try to deflect them back to the other students in the class, or I will offer an example from something I've read, but without saying that that's what I think, because I want students to learn not to expect an answer from me. And the whole point of philosophy is that we learn how to construct answers logically and rationally without someone holding our hand, and that the teacher is just there to support that process. So philosophy really is all of these things on the slide. This is what we do in a lesson. I won't read all of these out because I'm sure you can read them for yourself. But overall, I would say that the goal of a philosophy class is to create a space to think and speak together about ideas that are interesting and worth talking about. One question that comes out of this, though, especially for parents perhaps who are used to, not, or perhaps not familiar with philosophy and used to traditional education, is, well, if philosophy isn't about putting answers in students' heads, how do we know when students have made progress? After all, if we're just sitting around in a circle talking, there's a risk that all we do is talk in a circle and everyone gives their opinion, but we don't really go anywhere. We're just sort of saying what we think, and that's that. Well, I think this is a good question to ask, and it's definitely a question that has an answer. And here's at least the beginning of an answer. I think philosophy has as one of its major goals the what I would call the internalization of a group thinking process. What does that mean? Well, it means if you look at stage one here on the left, this diagram shows a typical philosophy class with a teacher here and a group of students, and we're all talking about a question that has been asked, and each of the arrows between the students is an individual comment or thought or question that's passing between us. The conversation develops between and among the students and is a product of each individual person offering a little bit, one after the other. However, if you do philosophy for months or years, what happens eventually is that this process is something that you can then bring inside of your own mind and use whenever you have a question to answer. So, for example, a student who's done philosophy for 3 or 4 years, when they open an exam paper and it says, is capital punishment appropriate in the 21st century, or is it really cruel and should be abolished? Well, someone who's not studied philosophy might struggle to think beyond their first thought. A student who's studied philosophy typically will be able to think something like this. Well, my first thought is that capital punishment is cruel and it's murder and so we shouldn't have it. However, I think it's also possible for some people to say that capital punishment is a really powerful deterrent, that it stops some people from committing crimes, and therefore it is useful in a way. And so they might disagree with me. And then, of course, another possible answer is this, and they will be able to occupy these multiple perspectives and structure an answer from inside their own mind. And this is something that I think is unique to students who do philosophy. So let me show you now an example of some materials that I would use with different age groups in the philosophy class. Here is an example of a lesson that I do very early on with students in junior high school, first grade. So these are students who are 11 years old or 12 years old. And you can see it's a very simple setup. The question is at the top, is it wrong to? And there's a 10, 10, 10, there's a dot, dot, dot. And so we're going to complete the question by filling in the words using these circles and squares. So behind the circles, there are some action words, some verbs. Behind the squares, there are some nouns. And so I would get students to roll a dice for each one. Maybe two students roll a dice, and one student rolls a 3 and another student rolls a 5. And I slide off the circle and the square to reveal a question. So, for example, we can get any of these rather chaotic looking questions, such as, is it wrong to tickle a baby? Is it wrong to murder a spider? Is it wrong to marry a tree? These questions seem a little frivolous, perhaps a little silly, but you'd be surprised how quickly a group of 12-year-olds can turn this into something very meaningful. So let's imagine, for example, that students roll their dice and they come up with this question here. Is it wrong to marry a tree? Okay, it's a little silly on the surface. I would give students 2 or 3 minutes to talk with the other students in the class. And after that, I would say, okay, is it wrong to marry a tree? Does anyone have a thought? And perhaps a student puts their hand up and says, this answer over here, the yes answer. And if they do so, I would try to write down their answer on the slide or on the board, and I would try to use exactly the words that they used because I want them to see that their thoughts are driving the lesson. So they might say, well, if you marry a tree, then you won't get any children. And children are what marriage is for. So I think it is wrong to marry a tree. Okay, I would say thank you very much. Would anyone else like to say something? Okay. And then a student might say, well, trees absorb carbon dioxide and give oxygen. If we marry trees, then maybe there'll be more trees. And so it will be better for the environment. Again, when I hear these answers, I have my own thoughts about which one might be better. But of course, as a facilitator, we never say that. I never jump in and say, okay, the yes answer was much better than the no answer. Because if I do that, the students will lose their confidence. They'll think that they're being judged and they will stop offering their thoughts to the class. So instead, what we want to do is find a way to get everybody in the class to consider their thinking more deeply. So let's see how we do this, how we deepen the discussion beyond just the first opinion. Let's go back and imagine that yes answer again. If a student said this, again, if you marry a tree, you won't get any children, which is what marriage is for. Well, if I hear this as a teacher, I think, well, maybe the student is assuming that marriage is just for the purpose of having children and that there's no other reason why people get married. But maybe also they've not thought about this assumption and they don't know that they're making it. In that case, there are a few things I can do. One of the things I might do is to turn to another student and say, Student B, what do you think about student A's idea? And maybe they'll give us something extra to think about. If not, I could ask a follow-up question to this student that would help them to think more about the purpose of marriage. For example, should you get married before having children? Is there another reason for people to get married? And they might come up with, well, because you found someone that you love, or because you want to buy a house together, or any number of reasons they might come up with. But they'll be thinking about marriage in a broader context, a bigger context. Or I might ask, what is marriage for? What is its purpose? And either of these questions will prompt the students to think further about their first answer. And it's in this way, through constant questioning, that we deepen the answers in the room. Okay, so that was a junior high school lesson. I want to now show you how the content changes when we move to senior high school. Senior high school, of course, students are more mature, they have more self-control. They're also interested in different material. Junior high school students tend to like stories with fictional characters and heroes and monsters at age 11 and 12. At age 16, 17, they're more interested in topics like war and human bodies and consequences and breaking the law and whether what's right and wrong, these kind of things. And so the topics are different and they're also more complex. One of the topics I've been discussing with the class at Glick that I have at the moment, the senior class, is to do with abortion. Abortion, of course, is the deliberate ending of a pregnancy. And so in the lesson about uh, we've read about fetuses, unborn children, and how they develop in the womb over 9 months of a pregnancy. And I've asked the students to consider the question, is abortion murder? Well, to answer this question, if murder means taking a life, we have to find out if an unborn child is a life in the full sense. Are they fully alive in the way that an adult is alive, or are they only partially alive? Because maybe they don't have a mind yet, or maybe they can't feel yet, or maybe they don't have emotions yet. All of these questions are swirling around the abortion debate, and it's a really interesting one for teenagers who are 16 and 17 to be thinking about. And so in that lesson, we tried to draw a distinction between a human being and a person. Some philosophers think that a human being just means anything that is a member of the biological species Homo sapiens. But a person is different from this. A person is um, is something that has a right to life because of the kind of creature it is. Maybe because it has high level thinking skills or the ability to express itself in a sophisticated way. And so these two things are different. And so in the class, we used this argument tree, this logic tree, to kind of invite students to follow their line of thinking down through the questions and to think about which features of of an adult and a child give that person the right to a life. For example, this is, by the way, an example of a slide from a lesson. All of the thoughts on this slide are the students' thoughts. These are not my thoughts at all. But what I ask the students is, can we put these things in the grey boxes into an order? The things that are most important for saying someone is a full person with a full life at the top, and the things that are least important at the bottom. And so there are things like, well, the ability to feel and perceive. Well, most human beings, even children, have the ability to perceive and feel. So if we think that this ability makes someone a full human, then maybe even unborn children can perceive and feel, and maybe that gives them the right to be alive, and therefore abortion would be murder. On the other hand, some of the students thought that actually, no, to be a full person, we need to be self-aware. We need to know that we are an individual with our own life and our own future and our own possibilities. And well, it seems like young children and babies don't have this. So maybe they don't yet have a full life. And maybe that means that abortion is not murder. And so we spent a couple of lessons actually going over all of these different ideas about what makes someone a person. I think looking at this, you can see the thinking in philosophy class is a little messy. It's a little all over the place, but it all comes from the students. It's not coming from me. I'm not feeding this to them. And I think even a few minutes spent reading this will show you just what teenagers can do if you give them the chance and the opportunity to think for themselves. So I really enjoy teaching this senior class. So overall, then, if we can sum up, the philosophy class is really about creating this space to think together. And the idea is that by practicing thinking, we create students that are more flexible in their thought process and more logical in how they structure their thinking. They can extend and develop their ideas together without so much input from the teacher. And this is a creative individual process. Still, I think there's one more question that probably we need to ask as especially as parents, which is if we've got a discussion class like philosophy, students come to it, they enjoy it, they find the topics interesting. Still, can we be sure that this discussion will turn into academic success? Because if we're attending lessons, we want to try and make sure that students can do the best that they can do in terms of access to good universities and future jobs and so on and so forth. So, how do we do that? How do we make sure that discussion turns into high level writing? And I think the answer to this within the Glick International Online School system is going to be the personalized essay feedback system that we have. According to this system, students are able to submit their written work at any time they wish and to receive personalized, individualized feedback in terms of how to improve their style or the organization of their essay, how to remove redundant phrases, how to edit for clarity, and all of these things that turn a first written answer into something smooth and persuasive and effective. So that's something that Glick International Online School will be offering throughout the 6 years of the program. Okay, I think that brings my presentation to an end. Thank you very much again for your time. If you have questions for me, please feel free to leave them with Suzuki Sensei, and he will be able to pass them on to me, and I'll get an answer back to you later. Thanks again for your time.